Birkat HaKoanim, the priestly blessing, a sacred invocation delivered by Jewish priests or Kohanim, who are the descendants of Aaron. This blessing is traditionally recited during prayer services and is accompanied by a distinctive hand gesture, the positioning of the fingers such that it forms the Hebrew letter Shin, or this. It represents Shaddai, the Almighty, or Shekhinah, the divine presence. Many recognize this gesture not only with its religious significance, but especially when it is combined with Proverbs 3:16, which the original says, "Long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor." Or, more famously, as it is simplified in the immortal words of Hollywood actor Leonard Nimoy. His character Spock in the sci-fi series Star Trek adapted the gesture into the iconic Vulcan salute.
Live long and prosper.
Yes, live long and prosper. This week in Israel, another of Spock's immortal lines has suddenly taken on new relevance as Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government find themselves grappling with a situation that is echoes in the sentiment from Star Trek. Hi, I'm Danny Seaman, and you're watching Straight Up on JNS TV in Jerusalem, Israel. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. This philosophical statement was uttered by Spock in a famous and heartbreaking scene out of a Star Trek movie. Its perfect emotional context is great for a drama scene, offering the viewers thought-provoking consideration. It may be an easy, even noble decision when you are the one making the choice yourself, as Spock did. But when having to apply this option in real life, it is more heart-wrenching than even a Greek tragedy. And Israel finds itself debating this precise, painful dilemma this week. How to bring the war in Gaza to a conclusion? Do we move forward and soundly defeat Hamas, but in the process endanger the hostages? Or do we give in to Hamas demands, and in the process endanger the very future of the citizens of this country? Israel has entered a critical week in the war in Gaza. After months of negotiations over the release of Israeli hostages and for reaching an end to the war in Gaza, it is now clear to all involved, Egypt, the United States, Israel, that Hamas is deliberately dragging its feet and has no intention on reaching an agreement. This has left the government of Israel, and especially Prime Minister Netanyahu, with an impossible, tragic, and inhumane dilemma. A dilemma of biblical proportions, as difficult as the choice Abraham had when asked to sacrifice Isaac, or with the King Solomon's judgment. The public debate here has encouraged Hamas to hold back, letting the debate in Israel boil, and let Israelis fight among ourselves. Ahmed Abu Sihab, who is a Hamas terrorist in Gaza, published a book recently in which he explains how Hamas has actually won the war by its very survival and the fact that Israel's society is fractured. So it should come as no surprise that with this being the feeling among the terrorists, that this was the list of demands that Hamas recently put forth to the negotiators. First, the release of all terrorists who were imprisoned in Israel who carried out the massacre of October 7th. Second, that hostage release will only be in accordance with the pace of Gaza's reconstruction. The final hostage will only be released after Gaza is fully rebuilt. A complete Israeli withdrawal from all areas of Gaza, with no security buffer between Israeli communities and the terrorists in Gaza. Another condition, the release of all Arab prisoners from Israeli jails, including murderers and perpetrators of severe terrorist attacks. And finally, a refusal to dismantle Hamas or disarm Gaza. No Israeli in their right mind can accept such conditions. The other thing that is encouraging Hamas has been the reaction in the international community to the pressure being applied only on Israel. We knew that our window for operation is very short. The moment Israel begins defending itself throughout the past generation, we have seen time and again how pressure mounts on us to cease, to restrain ourselves, to make concessions. The understanding among Israelis is that we are engaged in an existential war, and that is what has kept us from giving in to this pressure by the international community. And this has only served to increase the level of animosity and hatred directed against us and also Jews around the world. For years, certain circles have grown accustomed to targeting Jews and getting away with it, justifying it, even dressing it up as something else. It's easy when the targets are Jews. As you can see from this video, taken recently in England. Would any of them dare single out black people, Muslims, or Hispanics in this way? Of course not. But when it comes to Jews, it's always acceptable. In so-called civilized spaces, it will be more subtle, overt, such as a passing remark. Oh, you don't look Jewish. Or, oh, you know how they are, they. Or through whispered rumors, insinuations, stereotypes. Now there is the added complaint of how Jews take advantage of Western societies, or how Israel is using the United States, benefiting from its relationship with the United States. Rarely do they acknowledge at how much these societies have actually gained from Jews or from Israel in return. So they impose quotas, they limit participation of Jews, they make sure that institutions don't look too Jewish. Laws are applied selectively, one standard for Jews, another for everyone else. The same prejudices of the past are returning and now projected onto the Jewish state. They'll say they're not against Jews, just against Israel or Zionists. But they never single out any other country, only Israel, only the Jewish collective. Some resent our strength, our ability to defend ourselves, our refusal to play the victim. Now, the attacks come from higher places, rumors which become headlines. Media spins out stories out of thin air. No other country in the world would be expected to stand by while its citizens are murdered. No other people would tolerate that their government would do nothing in response. But when it comes to Israel, the rules change, and we're expected to accept these. For many in the West, and unfortunately in Israel itself, the calling out of Israel fulfills a need to project moral superiority, to be self-righteous, even if by doing so they are aiding murderous, despicable terrorists. So you can keep condemning Israel if you want to, and it makes you feel good about yourself. But just like this week, 80 years ago, we learned that good people have to stand up to evil and destroy it. So we, the citizens of Israel, will do what is in our best interest and what is in the best future of our children. As I mentioned in my opening, there's this element of people who are constantly accusing Israel of taking advantage of different countries and different allies, especially when it comes to the United States. And in no way do I want to belittle the fact that Israel gains tremendous because of the relationship between the United States and the State of Israel, and especially evident in the past 22 months. What people don't always see, and for years it has not always been evident, that the United States isn't doing this out of the goodness of their heart. Yes, there are interests, and yes, there are shared values, but at the end of the day, countries don't do things for other countries just because they're nice. And there are interests involved, and these interests are mutual. And here with the United States, not always are people informed about how much the United States benefits from its relationship with the State of Israel, and especially in the past few years. So I thought it would be very informative and useful for us to hear from somebody I've known for many years, who is now a retired ambassador of the State of Israel, who was the liaison to Capitol Hill in Washington. I know him from 40 years ago when I met him as the Consul General of Israel in Houston, Texas. Yoram Ettinger, who is a Middle East expert, an expert on Israel-American relations, U.S. relations. And I thought it would be wonderful to have him here with us to discuss the different aspects of this relationship with the United States. Yoram Ettinger, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure and my privilege to be here.
Thank you. So as I said, we know each other for many years. You've been very much involved, I think more than the average Israeli, with the high level of relationships between Israel and the United States. Now, we all know what Israel gets from that. If you want to elaborate a little more on the aspects that of Israel receives from the United States. And then I think it's important for people to hear a little about how the U.S. also benefits from its relationship with Israel more than from any other country in the world. So please, stage is yours.
Well, there is a misperception that Israel receives annual foreign aid from the United States. The reality is that the U.S. makes an annual investment in Israel, which yields back to the American taxpayer the highest ever return on investment, a few times higher than the dollar scope of the $3.8 billion foreign aid, supposedly foreign aid. And there are many evidence to confirm that. Unlike NATO countries, unlike South Korea and Japan, Israel does not have and does not want U.S. military bases on its soil. Unlike NATO, Japan, and South Korea, we are fully manned military power. We don't want Americans fighting on our soil.
This is an important point because a lot of people say, oh, we don't want to fight Israel's wars. The United States has never, with the exception of what happened in a few months ago with Iran, Americans have never engaged on the part of Israel in any of the wars that we've been engaged in.
And even with Iran, the U.S. engaged on behalf of American interest, which happens to be, they have to do with a mutual threat to Israel and the U.S. And this military engagement, military offensive by Israel and the U.S. on Iran highlights the very special role played by Israel in bolstering tremendously the power projection of the U.S.
Before we go into that, I want to go back to the foreign aid, because that's like the starting point. Unlike other countries, the aid that Israel receives is spent. All of it is spent back in the United States. So people have to understand this is not something that's just given to Israel. There is a relationship there also that also benefits the American economy.
Israel doesn't get money. Israel gets credit to purchase advanced U.S. military systems for which Israel is immensely, immensely grateful.
Right.
However, once we receive, let's say, the F-35, F-16, F-15 combat aircraft or tanks or missile launchers or missiles, once we receive those military systems, we employ them operationally in Israel, which in fact is a most cost-effective, battle-tested laboratory on behalf of the U.S. in defense and aerospace industry, as well as an innovation center for the U.S. Armed Forces.
So we're R&D.
We use the American combat aircraft on a daily basis, much more intense use than any military power in the world because of our very special challenges. Every day yields lessons. Those lessons are shared with the manufacturer through an Israeli team on location in Fort Worth, Texas, where the F-35 and F-16 is manufactured, or in St. Louis, Missouri, Boeing, where the F-15 is manufactured. The Israeli team on location receives the Israeli lessons, sharing it with the appropriate division of the manufacturer, and those lessons are interjected into the next generation of the combat aircraft as upgrades. We're talking about hundreds of such upgrades, derivative of the Israeli experience, which, according to some managers in the Fort Worth plant of Lockheed Martin, the F-35 and the F-16, those lessons and upgrades have saved the plant anywhere between 10 and 20 years of research and development. Anyone who knows anything about the cost of research and development would realize we're talking about mega billion-dollar bonanza to Lockheed Martin, to Boeing, and we're talking about hundreds of military systems which we use, and each one goes through the same process. We not only save huge amount of money in terms of research and development, but those upgrades enhance the competitiveness of the American military systems in the global market. and that causes an increase in exports, which brings back to the U.S. a few more $billion. And altogether, it expands the employment base, and we're talking about 3.5 million Americans employed by the defense and aerospace industry, in addition to litany of subcontractors, all of whom benefit from this battle-tested laboratory, otherwise known as Israel, which does not get foreign aid, but benefits from an investment and brings back a return on investment which is higher than any American investment ever made domestically or globally.
I mentioned that you were also the liaison to Capitol Hill from our embassy in Washington. I've heard this, that the aid that Israel does receive, the dollar amount, Israel has to spend it in the United States. And we've done this, and it's not only, you were talking now about missiles and the aircraft, but it can be from the boots to the uniforms. We purchase all our military equipment from American companies, and it's spread out, I believe, on 48 different states. Am I correct with that?
Well, it's spread around most states, but again, we don't get money, we don't get any tangible element at the expense of the American taxpayer. In fact, we enhance the fortunes of the American taxpayer. A very striking evidence took place only a few weeks ago, June war against Iran. During that war, the U.S. for the first time bombed 3 major nuclear installations in Iran. However, the U.S. did that after 12 days of bombing by Israel, which demolished completely the Iranian Air Force and the Iranian ground-to-air batteries and defense systems. Namely, it was the Israeli military which made it possible for the U.S. to bomb those targets unimpeded by Iranian military forces, and this has been the nature of U.S.-Israel collaboration, not a one-way street where the U.S. provides and Israel receives, but it's a two-way street which has been mutually beneficial. We're talking about Israel, which has done the same thing also commercially. In the civilian market, Israel has been the platform of some 250 American high-tech giants establishing in Israel their research and development centers. The reason they established those research and development centers in Israel has nothing to do with the level of salaries paid in Israel, because high-tech salaries are very high in Israel. The reason is because those high-tech giants want to leverage the brain power of Israel, and that which we have done for upgrading the F-35 and the F-16 and the F-15 and the tanks and the choppers and many other military systems, we also do for Intel and Microsoft and Facebook. For instance, few years ago, the CEO of Microsoft told the board of directors that by the day Microsoft becomes increasingly an Israeli company due to the impact of the Israeli research and development centers on the nature and the quality of Microsoft products. The CEO of Intel told his board of directors, if not for our research and development centers in Israel, Intel would have been decimated by the global competition.
And that's also the global competition is also a thing between superpowers, et cetera. We know today that China has been investing a lot in these technologies, especially futuristic technologies such as AI. And President Trump made it very important, let it known that for the United States competing with China on the AI front will determine what the future of the United States is. And he too has signed an agreement with Israel of cooperation, of American-Israel cooperation in the area of AI development and anything in the future for that matter.
Well, the mutually beneficial cooperation between U.S. and Israel has to do with facing mutual enemies, Sunni and Shiite Islamic terrorism, but also advancing mutual goals. And the mutual goal for both the U.S. and Israel is to make it possible for the U.S. to maintain its global edge. And the U.S. is quite aware that in order to maintain its global edge, they're better off teaming with Israel. But it's more than that. We're talking about Israel being an innovation center, for instance, for U.S. battle tactics. An example, U.S. special operations going to Iraq or Syria or Jordan, many of them stop on the way in Israel for 2 weeks training by top Israelis specializing in facing car bombs, suicide bombers, and deadly improvised explosive devices. I met an active duty colonel, American colonel, commander of Special Operation Battalion who just came back from a year of service, and he mentioned to me that much of the credit to the fact that the battalion came back to the U.S. without a single fatality has to do with those 2 weeks training by Israeli specialists. And later on, he told me that he spends most of the year traveling around the world, training Allies special operations throughout the world. There's only one country, he told me, where he does not train, but am trained, and that is trained, and that is Israel. And that, according to him, is the added value of Israel to the United States. We're talking about intelligence information. Yes. Intelligence which has to do with Israel's being part of the Middle East, which is a critical threat to Israel. The epicenter of anti-American Islamic terrorism is in the Middle East. And Israel has certain standing when it comes to understanding the ethnic, the religious, the cultural, the linguistic background of those terrorists. We have shared that information with the Americans, and that has made Americans much safer on U.S. soil as well as throughout the world. A few years ago, Israel detected in Syria an ISIS unit working on planting bombs in laptops. Israel shared that information with the U.S., which revolutionized completely security in airports in the U.S. and throughout the world. It has to do with Israel's intelligence capabilities, which are unique. We're talking about Israel receiving $3.8 billion, and most countries, most allies of the U.S. do not receive such sums of money defined as foreign aid. They receive it in terms of tens of thousands of American soldiers stationed on their soil. They receive it in terms of major military bases erected by the Americans on their soil. In Israel, we are largely self-funded. We are certainly fully manned by Israelis, and the acquaintance which we have developed with the battlefield due to the threats which we face on a daily basis has been shared on a systematic basis with Americans. American military people pay many more visits the last 2 years of our war with Gaza and Lebanon and Yemen and Iran more than any other year. The reason American commanders, military commanders, come to Israel is to study the way we face those threats. According to a recent FBI report, pro-Iranian or Iranian-controlled anti-American Islamic terrorist groups consider Hamas terrorism in Israel as an inspiration to repeat such terrorism on American soil. This is not my assessment. This has been the FBI assessment, and certainly for Israel to share our experience with the U.S. has made the U.S. much more defensible in the face of terrorism. In fact, I met a former commander of the U.S. Marine Corps, retired General Chuck Krulek, and he mentioned to me that he spent 3 years in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, which is like the Mecca, the intellectual Mecca of the U.S. Army. And according to him, much of the formulation of battle tactics at Fort Leavenworth is based on the Israeli experience. And that's part of the partnership which we have developed with the U.S. We are certainly the junior partner. The U.S. is obviously by far the senior partner, but this is not a foreign aid type of relations. It's strategic partnership which has benefited both sides.
And this is the interesting thing, that people are applying the values of this war, or the criticism of Israel, based on wars of the past. And what Israel is actually engaged in is the future of what these wars are going to be. When you have a differentiation between the power, such as the United States or NATO, for example, and smaller countries, as the Iranians said, they're looking at what Hamas has been doing with Israel and the way they've been manipulating elements of Western values to present themselves in a way of being, getting the sympathy of elements of Western society. This is something that not only Israel is going to face. This is something that the Western world, and especially led by the United States, understand that they could very well, and they've already been engaged in this kind of battlefield up until now. So studying from Israel gives them an insight into the future.
Well, in fact, Israel has been the first line of defense of Western democracies in general, certainly Europe, but also the USA. We are facing Hamas terrorists. Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood,
Right.
which since 1928 has strived not only to topple every single national Islamic government and establish a universal Islamic society governed by the only legitimate religion, which is, according to them, Islam, but according to the Muslim Brotherhood, therefore Hamas, a major goal is to bring the great American Satan to submission. We face Iran, the Ayatollah regime in Iran. Since 1979, February 79, when they took over control of Iran, they have been driven by a 1,400-year-old fanatic ideology, which also instructs them to bring Western infidel to submission. But when it comes to the Western infidel, the primary prize is bring the Americans to submission. They do fight Israel not because of Israel alone. They fight Israel primarily because they correctly view Israel as the strategic avant-garde of the U.S. in what they call the abode of Islam. Fighting the Ayatollah regime, fighting Hamas, fighting in the past Egypt and Syria, which were armed by top Soviet military systems, has made it possible for Israel to share with the U.S. lessons which are also helping the U.S. to withstand similar threats. When Israel fought Egypt and Syria armed with Soviet military systems, we captured Soviet combat aircraft, we captured Soviet tanks, we captured most advanced Soviet radar systems. We shared that information with the Americans. I heard from a former chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the late Senator Daniel Inouye, that not only has Israel or did Israel share with the U.S. scope of intelligence, which is much, much larger than intelligence shared by NATO with the U.S., but also he mentioned that particular Soviet radar system, which Israel snatched from Egypt back in 1969, the P-12 radar, that radar alone, by reverse engineering, by its impact on research and development of radar industry in America, has contributed to the American industry $3 billion. That's only one item of the litany of items which we have shared with the Americans. We do it because, again, we identify fully with the U.S., but we do not do it as a beggar asking for some handout by the Americans. In fact, unlike West European countries where you have left and right governments, and each time there is a difference in the attitude towards the U.S. in Israel, whether it's a left government or right of center government in Israel, Israel has always been systematically very reliable ally of the U.S., and for Israel, there's no substitute for the United States.
So we're not saying we're not doing this. We know we're getting something in return, but this is a mutually beneficial relationship. That said, and you touched upon this now with your what you just said here about the relationship and the Israeli governments. We're seeing a shift because your role in the United States was liaison to Capitol Hill. You worked with Democrats, Republicans. Your years of experience with it. What can you see there? Is there, as a lot of us in Israel are seeing, a shift away from Israel among Democrats, but also among certain Republicans? Is that something we have to be concerned about?
Well, we certainly cannot afford to be complacent,
right.
But at the same time, we must not take it in a fatalistic manner. There is much that Israel should do and does not still do. For instance, there has been a major demographic shift in the U.S. The U.S. demographically, the U.S. of 2025 is not the U.S. of 1960s or 1990s or the early 2000s. Israel has to adjust its approach to the U.S. to the new demographics, because new demographics means new culture and new ideology and new politics. Fundamentally, we have seen the American population distancing itself gradually from the legacy of the early pilgrims and the founding fathers. That legacy was largely based on biblical values, which therefore led to being very, very supportive of the Jewish state. Currently, less and less fraction of the American population is attached to that legacy of the founding father, which, by the way, has been a winning legacy, because that's the formula which launched the U.S. to unprecedented achievements in human history. Certainly when it comes to putting forward our case in the U.S., going back to the issue of yes foreign aid or no foreign aid, there has been a mistaken approach by Israel and its friends on Capitol Hill and off Capitol Hill. Obviously, we are obligated, we have to thank America for its assistance to Israel, for the privilege of receiving from the U.S. advanced U.S. military system. But at the same time, when we come to congressional offices or to State Department or Pentagon or White House divisions, we must not limit ourselves to asking for foreign aid or thanking for foreign aid. We should, in my assessment, invest most of the time to clarify our interlocutors how beneficial has been the investment in Israel in advancing American economy and American defense.
Any American elected official would have in their own interest, regardless if they support Israel or not, that's not the issue. If they support the people who vote for them in their area, if it's a congressperson or if it's a senator, they should want this relationship because it benefits their own voters. Regardless of what they may think of Israel, when you come down to the practical aspects of it, it is something that is beneficial to the American economy, to the American public, and you would expect, and not to mention American interests, and if they have the best interest of the United States at heart, this should be something that they support.
Well, there's no doubt for Israel sharing its experience with the U.S. Armed Forces makes the U.S. Armed Forces more secure, make their battle tactics more effective. For Israel to share its experience with the aerospace industry and defense industry as a whole saves the industry billions of dollars, increases American exports, expands American employment. But that story has to be told. Most Americans are not aware of it. I'm not sure that most Israelis are aware of it. And most people are captivated by the very simplistic notion that Israel receives foreign aid from the states. Let's be very honest. For the U.S. government, Israel receiving foreign aid is very, very helpful in passing foreign aid bill. If Israel would not be among the recipients of foreign aid bill, probably there would not be a majority for approving foreign aid to
other countries
to
who benefit.
many countries. And therefore, it's a matter of convenience for the U.S. to stick Israel into that company of foreign aid recipients. When it comes to foreign aid, Israel is not foreign, and Israel does not receive aid. We're not foreign, going back to the early pilgrims and the founding fathers who relied heavily on biblical and especially Mosaic legacy in establishing the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. Bill of Rights. And when it comes to aid, this is no aid. This is very, very beneficial investment for the American taxpayer.
You mentioned that the story of what is actually happening here does not come out, and that's interesting because you were a predecessor of mine, and when I was head of the government press office, you were also head of the government press office, which is the office within the office of the Prime Minister that deals and handles the foreign press. Do you see, since when you were there back in, the 1990s, do you see a decline in the way the media covers events here, the focus on presenting the truth and not narratives? This is a lot of what we're seeing now. Were you aware of that back then when you were head of the government press office?
Well, I'm not shocked by the way Israel is covered by the media. I experienced it when I was the head of the government press office. I experienced not only the oversimplification of the coverage, not only being subjected to alternate reality rather than to the real reality of the Middle East, but I was also very well educated on the motivation of foreign journalists as coming from their headquarters throughout the world. Most foreign media outlets view their role as being critical of Israel, not complimentary of Israel. The vast majority, almost all foreign journalists stationed here in Israel are aware. If they are not going to report kindly on Palestinians, Palestinian terrorism included, they will not get stories from Palestinians. And in order to guarantee the receipt or the flow of stories which make their profession thriving, they also have to make certain payment to the source of those stories. And I remember vividly one such case when I had dinner with the head of an American media outlet in Israel, and the bureau chief told me from the outset that he apologizes for his coverage because he knows that in order to continue covering, he has to appease the sources of the stories in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria. I don't think Israel can do much to combat that, but at the same time, we can do much and much, much more than we do today, presenting to American and European and global movers and shakers and legislators and executive leaders the reality of the Middle East. In most cases, take for instance the State Department in the US, the Foreign Office in Britain, the Quai d'Orsay, the Foreign Office in France, they sacrifice the very frustrating, bleeding, insoluble Middle East reality on the altar of very convenient alternate reality which does not demand blood, sweat, and tears, alternate reality which is soluble, alternate reality where it's very easy to conclude peace. You simply concede to the terrorist and you supposedly receive peace. Why deal with the actual reality which does not render itself to peace now or new Middle East?
Yoram Ettinger, we could have gone on for hours. Your experience and knowledge and years of being involved with the foreign service in Israel and the media, we can see how tremendous knowledgeable, and we're grateful that you shared it here with us and with our viewers. So I want to thank you, former liaison to the Capitol Hill, former ambassador of the State of Israel, former director of the Government Press Office, Yoram Ettinger. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for being here with us and listening to this. I'm Danny Seaman, and I'll be with you next week. Thank you very much.